The land was already cold before winter fully showed its strength. The air felt sharp, like it could cut if you breathed too fast. The sky stayed pale for most of the day, and when the sun appeared, it felt weak, as if it did not want to stay long. This was North America in a time when the world moved slower, and nature decided everything. Snow began to fall quietly. At first, it was light and almost peaceful. Then it returned again and again, covering the ground until all familiar shapes disappeared. Paths vanished. Hills softened under white layers. Trees stood still, holding snow on their branches like a heavy secret. Rivers slowed down, then froze, turning into long, silent mirrors. The land stopped making noise. Even sound felt tired. This was a land of ice and silence. The cold did not rush. It settled in. It stayed. It pressed down on everything, slowly and without mercy. Standing outside for too long made fingers forget how to move. Toes went numb. Breathing felt harder, like the air itself was not very friendly. The wind moved across the land in long waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes angry, always cold. There were no warm houses waiting at the end of the day, no lights glowing in windows, no thick walls to hide behind, just shelters made from what the land could give. Wood, grass, animal hides, fire, and a lot of patience. For Native American tribes living here, winter was not a surprise guest. It was a known force. They had seen it before. They had survived it before. But that did not make it easy. Every winter came with its own dangers, and every mistake carried a price. Food became precious. Hunting grew harder as animals moved or hid. Snow covered tracks, making even skilled hunters work twice as hard. Firewood had to be collected carefully, because once the land froze deeply, gathering became slow and exhausting. Nothing could be wasted. Not time, not energy, not food. Nights were long, very long. Darkness arrived early and stayed like it was comfortable. The moon hung low in the sky, lighting up endless white ground. Stars looked sharp and distant, like they were also cold and trying to stay away. The silence of night was deep, broken only by the wind and the crackle of fire. Above ground, everything felt exposed. The wind slipped through small gaps. It pushed against shelters. It made fires burn faster. Even wrapped in thick hides, the cold found ways to remind people that it was in control. And yet, people stayed calm. They stayed calm because panic did not help. Panic only wasted energy, and energy was life. Instead, they watched. They listened. They learned. They noticed that animals behaved differently in winter. Some disappeared. Some burrowed. Some stayed close to the ground. Nature was showing them something important, but only if they paid attention. They also noticed the earth itself. When digging for storage or fixing shelters, people felt it. Beneath the frozen surface, the ground was quieter. The cold above was sharp and cruel, but below the earth felt steady. Not warm like summer, but not dangerous either. It held its temperature. It did not change its mood quickly. The wind could scream all it wanted above ground. The earth did not care. This idea stayed in their minds. It returned again and again, especially during the coldest nights. While sitting close to the fire, Wrapped in hides, elders spoke softly. They talked about winters long past, about storms that buried entire camps, about people who survived because they planned and people who did not because they rushed. Their words were not dramatic. They were calm, almost quiet. Like winter itself, children listened closely. They learned early that winter was serious business. You did not wander far. You stayed close. You shared warmth. You respected fire. You respected food. And most of all, you respected the land. The land was not evil. It was honest. It showed no mercy, but it also offered protection if you understood where to look. During heavy storms, when snow fell so thick that the world disappeared, staying above ground felt like a challenge made by nature just to test patience. Shelters shook, fires struggled, the wind sounded like it was searching for weakness, but beneath the ground things were different. The earth stayed firm, quiet, still. People began to understand that survival did not mean standing tall against winter. It meant lowering yourself. It meant hiding from the wind instead of fighting it. It meant trusting the land that had carried their ancestors for generations. This understanding did not come in one night. It came slowly, shaped by cold mornings and frozen evenings. It came from tired hands and careful thinking, from watching what worked and remembering what failed. Winter forced everyone to slow down. Movements became careful. Words became fewer. Energy was saved for what mattered. There was no rush, because rushing in winter led to mistakes, and mistakes led to silence of a different kind. Still, life continued. Families stayed together. Warmth was shared. Stories were told softly, not loudly. Laughter still existed, though quieter than summer laughter. Sometimes it came from small things, a fire that finally caught, a meal that filled the stomach, a storm that passed without damage. In this frozen world, strength was not loud. It was patient. The land of ice and silence shaped the people living on it. It taught them to observe instead of react, to plan instead of hope, to work together instead of alone. Survival was not about bravery. It was about understanding. The earth waited beneath the snow. The winter pressed down from above, and life, careful and thoughtful, found ways to continue. Here, in the deep cold, survival began with one simple truth. The land always speaks. Only the quiet ones hear it. The cold did not arrive like a sudden attack. It arrived slowly, quietly, and then refused to leave. Winter was not just a season here. It was the strongest force on the land. Stronger than hunger, stronger than fear, stronger than any single person. Once winter settled in, everything else had to adjust around it. The air grew heavier each day. Breathing felt sharper, especially in the early mornings. Frost formed on anything left outside, even on thoughts, it seemed. Water skin stiffened. Tools felt colder to touch. Skin cracked. Lips dried. The cold did not shout. It worked silently, minute by minute. Snow kept falling, not all at once, but in steady waves. Each snowfall erased signs of life. Tracks disappeared. Familiar paths became dangerous guesses. What was safe yesterday could be a trap today. A shallow dip in the ground vanished under snow and became a hidden fall waiting for tired legs. Winter did not care how skilled you were. Hunting became a test of patience and luck. Animals moved less, and when they moved carefully. Some disappeared completely. Others blended into the white world so well that even sharp eyes missed them. Hunters spent more time searching than striking. Every hunt burned energy, and energy was precious. Food shortages were not dramatic. They were quiet and slow. Meals grew smaller. Choices became harder. Should food be eaten now or saved for later? No one knew how long winter would last, and guessing wrong could be deadly. Fire became the center of everything. It warmed hands. It cooked food. It kept fear away during long nights. But fire was hungry. It needed wood, and wood was harder to collect once the land froze deep. Trees snapped differently in the cold. Axes felt heavier. Every trip outside cost warmth and strength. Sometimes the fire burned lower than hoped, and everyone pretended not to notice. The wind made everything worse. It did not stay still. It searched. It pushed. It slipped into every weak place. It crawled through gaps in shelters, between layers of hides, around the edges of fires. Even when snow stopped falling, the wind kept winter alive. Above ground, there was nowhere to hide from it. Night came early, and with it came a different kind of cold. Without sunlight, the land seemed to sink further into itself. Fires looked smaller, shadows looked longer. Sounds carried strangely, sometimes far, sometimes not at all. Sleep was light. People woke often. A dying fire, a sudden gust of wind, the crack of ice shifting somewhere in the dark. Winter did not let anyone fully relax. Children felt it too. Their movements slowed. Their voices softened. They stayed closer to adults without being told. Even play changed. There was less running, more sitting, less noise, more watching. Winter had a way of teaching lessons without words. Sickness was another quiet enemy. Cold weakened bodies. Small problems became serious faster. Without warmth, healing slowed. People rested more, not because they were lazy, but because survival demanded it. No one wasted energy on anger or fear. Those emotions burned too much fuel. Instead, people watched the land closely. They studied the way snow gathered, the way wind changed direction, the way animals behaved before storms. Winter punished those who ignored signs, but it rewarded those who noticed small details. Elders spoke often during this time. Their voices were calm, steady, and trusted. They had seen winters that were worse. They had survived storms that buried camps. Their stories were not meant to scare. They were meant to prepare. They spoke about winters that lasted longer than expected, about hunger that crept in slowly, about the importance of staying together, because isolation made everything harder. In winter, being alone was dangerous in ways summer never was. Above ground living became a constant effort. Shelters needed constant care. Snow piled up on roofs and had to be cleared. Wind loosened bindings and needed fixing. Fires demanded attention. Nothing stayed stable for long. Everything needed watching. Winter did not allow neglect. Even strong shelters felt temporary under winter's pressure. Wood creaked. Hides stiffened. Grass insulation lost its strength over time. Every cold night tested the limits of what had been built. People began to feel it clearly now. Winter was not something to push through with force. Strength alone was not enough. Hard work alone was not enough. Winter outlasted both. This was why winter became known as the greatest enemy, not because it attacked suddenly, not because it was dramatic, but because it stayed. It stayed when food was low. It stayed when bodies were tired. It stayed when hope felt thin. And yet, winter was honest. It showed clearly what worked and what did not. It exposed weak plans and rewarded careful ones. It forced people to think differently, to question old habits, to look for smarter ways instead of harder ones. Slowly, quietly, a change began in how people thought about survival. Instead of asking how to fight winter, they began asking how to avoid its worst parts. Instead of standing tall against the wind, they wondered how to step away from it. Instead of building higher, they considered building lower. The idea did not arrive fully formed. It appeared in small thoughts, in quiet moments near dying fires, in tired glances at snow-covered shelters, in the feeling of relief when standing close to the ground during storms. Winter made one thing very clear. The surface of the land belonged to the cold, and anything that wanted to survive had to respect that truth. So people observed, they adapted, they waited. Winter remained the greatest enemy, but it also became the greatest teacher. The cold did not only shape the land, it shaped memory. When winter ruled everything, knowledge became more valuable than strength. Muscles got tired, tools broke, but wisdom stayed if it was remembered and shared. And for Native American tribes, wisdom did not live in books or written rules. It lived in people. It lived in elders. During long winter nights, when the fire burned low and the wind pressed against shelters, elders spoke. Their voices were calm, steady, never rushed. They did not raise their tone, because winter already demanded enough attention. These were not stories meant to impress. They were stories meant to keep people alive. Children listened without being told to listen. Everyone did. When someone had survived many winters, you paid attention to every word. Survival earned respect. The elders talked about winters that came early and stayed late, about storms that buried camps so deeply that the land itself looked new when spring finally arrived. They spoke about hunger, not dramatically, but honestly. About times when food had to be shared carefully, when patience mattered more than bravery. They also spoke about mistakes. Mistakes were important lessons. Someone who went too far alone. Someone who wasted firewood. Someone who ignored the signs of a coming storm. These stories were not told to shame. They were told so the same mistakes would not be repeated. Wisdom was passed gently, not forced. Children learned by watching before they learned by doing. They watched how adults prepared food, how they respected fire, how they moved differently in winter than in summer. They learned when to be quiet and when to act. No one explained everything at once. Learning came in layers like snow. Elders often reminded the young that winter punished pride. If you believed you were stronger than the land, winter corrected that belief very quickly. The land always won. The smart ones learned to move with it. Knowledge was shared through routine, through repetition, through small daily actions. How to sit closer to the ground when winds were strong. How to layer hides properly. How to read the sky, not with fear, but with understanding. There was no rush to teach everything in one season. Life itself was the teacher. Every generation added something new, a small improvement, a better way to store food, a smarter way to position shelters, a reminder of what failed before. Wisdom was not fixed. It grew slowly, shaped by experience and loss. Winter made sure no lesson was forgotten. Even humor found its way into teaching. Elders sometimes laughed softly when talking about foolish choices made long ago. Not to make light of danger, but to remind everyone that humans learned by trying and failing. A quiet laugh helped fear loosen its grip. Respect for elders was natural, not demanded. People knew that those who had survived many winters carried something valuable. Their bodies held memory. Their minds held patterns. Their calm came from knowing that panic never helped. Wisdom also moved through rituals. Before winter fully arrived, certain practices were repeated. Tools were checked. Food was counted. Shelters were prepared. These actions were not random. They were habits formed through generations of trial and error. Doing them connected people to those who had done the same things long before. The land itself was part of the teaching. Elders encouraged listening, listening to wind changes, listening to the way snow fell, listening to animals. Nature spoke first, humans responded second. That order mattered. Young people learned that asking questions was not weakness. It was survival. The smartest hunters were the ones who asked why things happened, not just how. Wisdom was also shared through silence. Not every lesson needed words. Sometimes elders simply watched and allowed mistakes to happen when the risk was small. A cold hand, a missed opportunity. These small discomforts taught quickly and stayed remembered. Winter created strong memory. As years passed, children became adults. Adults became elders. And the knowledge moved forward, carried by voices, habits, and shared experience. No single person owned it. It belonged to the people. This passing of wisdom created stability in an unstable world. When everything above ground changed daily, knowledge provided something solid, something reliable. It reminded everyone that survival was not about one winter. It was about many winters. And each generation stood on the lessons of the last, quietly preparing for the cold, armed not just with tools, but with understanding. The idea did not arrive suddenly. It did not come from one person or one moment of inspiration. It formed slowly, shaped by cold winters, tired bodies, and careful thinking. Like most important ideas, it grew quietly. People had always touched the earth. They dug for food. They buried supplies. They repaired shelters by pressing mud and soil into place. And every time they did, they noticed something. The ground felt different. Above the surface, winter was sharp and restless. Wind never stopped moving. Snow piled up, shifted, and returned again. But beneath the frozen top layer, the earth stayed calm. It did not scream with cold. It did not change its mood quickly. It felt steady, almost patient. This difference stayed in people's minds. During the coldest nights, when fires struggled and shelters shook, people noticed how close to the ground felt safer. Sitting lower meant less wind. Digging shallow spaces for storage meant food stayed protected. Even animals understood this. Some burrowed. Some stayed close to the earth. Nature was giving hints again, and people were listening. At first, no one talked about living underground. That would have sounded extreme. Instead, small choices began to change. Entrances were built lower. Walls were reinforced with earth. Storage pits were dug deeper. Each change made winter a little easier, a little quieter. These small successes mattered. When something worked during winter, it was remembered. When it failed, it was quietly corrected. Over time, a pattern appeared. Earth was not just something to stand on. It was something that could protect. The soil acted like a blanket. It held warmth. It slowed the cold. While air temperatures changed wildly, the ground stayed balanced. This was not science explained in words, but science understood through experience. People began to imagine more. If a little earth helped, what about more? If shallow pits stayed warmer, what about deeper ones? These thoughts were not rushed. Winter taught patience. Ideas were tested carefully, not dramatically. A deeper storage pit one season, a reinforced shelter the next. Each winter provided feedback. The wind remained the biggest problem above ground. It found every weakness. It stole warmth without effort. But underground, the wind had no power. It could howl all it wanted above the surface. Below, it disappeared. That silence mattered. People also understood something emotional. Being underground felt safer, sheltered, held. The earth created a sense of calm that thin walls could not. During storms, when snow erased the world outside, being surrounded by solid ground brought peace. It felt like being hidden from winter's anger. This feeling was not ignored. Survival was not only physical. Fear drained energy too. Anything that reduced fear helped people endure long winters. Elders began to speak about the earth differently, not just as land, but as protection, as something that could be trusted. The idea of being beneath the earth was no longer strange. It felt natural. Spiritual beliefs supported this shift. The earth was respected as a living force. Being close to it was not seen as weakness. It was seen as wisdom. Returning to it during the hardest time of year made sense. Still, caution remained. Flooding, dampness, and stability were concerns. People knew the earth could protect, but only if approached carefully. Everything had to be planned with respect. Nothing about this idea was rushed. Winter after winter, small experiments continued. Entrances angled differently, roofs supported by wood and soil, living spaces lowered gradually. Each success built confidence. The earth proved itself again and again. It blocked wind. It softened the cold. It created quiet. What started as observation slowly became understanding. What began as shallow digging turned into a new way of thinking about shelter. Not tall, not visible, but strong in its stillness. Living beneath the earth was no longer just an idea. It was becoming a solution shaped by patience, memory, and deep respect for the land. The first step to surviving winter was choosing where to live. Not every patch of land was equal. Some spots looked fine at first glance, but winter tested everything. The wrong place could mean deep cold, wind cutting through shelters, or snow piling too high. Choosing wisely was life itself. Tribes learned to read the land like a book. Hills were important. A small rise could block the harshest winds. Valleys could trap snow, making travel difficult, but sometimes they offered protection from storms. People watched carefully where animals went. If deer or other creatures found a spot safe, humans noticed too. Nature often gave hints before humans even acted. Water was another key factor. Streams and rivers were vital, but living too close could be risky. Flooding in spring or heavy snowmelt could destroy a shelter. Too far from water, and the daily work of fetching it could sap energy. Finding the right balance required observation, patience, and experience passed down from elders. Soil mattered. Not just any ground would do. Soft soil was easier to dig into for underground shelters, but it needed to hold its shape. Rocky soil made digging slow and painful, but it provided stability. People learned to test the earth, feeling its texture, checking how it responded to digging. They noticed how frozen layers behaved and planned accordingly. Sunlight played its part too. South-facing slopes often received a little more warmth during short winter days. Even a few extra hours of sun could help soften frozen ground or warm a shelter slightly. The wise always considered the sun's path when deciding where to settle. Protection from wind was crucial. Open plains might look beautiful, but they were deadly in winter. Winds moved faster across flat land, cutting through hides and tents. Natural barriers, trees, hills, or rocks were studied carefully. Shelters were often positioned behind these barriers, using the land itself as defense. Tribal knowledge guided these choices. Elders remembered which spots had survived previous winters and which had failed. Children learned early that location mattered more than effort alone. A well-built shelter in the wrong place could fail, while a modest shelter in the right spot could survive the harshest storm. Safety was also considered. Some locations were hidden from sight, reducing the chance of predators or rival groups. Camouflage mattered. Snow and ice could conceal a home if it was chosen wisely. People learned subtle tricks to use the land as a shield. Even small details were important. Slight slopes for drainage, firm soil for digging, and nearby wood for fires, all these were part of the decision. Choosing a location was never random. Every aspect was carefully weighed, slowly and patiently. In the end, survival in winter began with location. The perfect spot balanced safety, warmth, access to resources, and stability. Finding it required listening to the land, watching the animals, and trusting the wisdom of generations. This careful choice laid the foundation for life underground, where winter's greatest threats could finally be softened. The land gave everything people needed, but nothing came ready-made. Every tool had to be made from what was around them: stones, wood, bones, and plants. There were no factories, no metal shops, no quick fixes. Survival depended on using nature cleverly and patiently. Sharp stones became knives and scrapers. People chipped and shaped them carefully, learning how a single strike could make a piece perfect. Bones from hunted animals became needles, awls, and small chisels. Even the smallest bones were useful if handled correctly. Every material was examined for strength, flexibility, and purpose. Nothing was wasted. Wood was everywhere, but it needed preparation. Branches were chosen for toughness, sometimes dried, sometimes split, depending on the tool. Strong beams supported shelters. Thin sticks became digging implements or parts of traps. Twigs were woven into baskets and containers. Wood could be bent, tied, and sharpened. It was everywhere, yet nothing was used carelessly. Plant fibers played a quiet but crucial role. Strips of bark, roots, and grasses were twisted into ropes and bindings. They tied shelters together. They held tools. They sometimes even became mats for insulation. Nature's fibers were flexible, strong, and renewable, making them perfect for daily needs. Making a tool was more than a task. It was a lesson. Every cut, chip, or weave taught patience. Every mistake taught improvement. A dull stone might fail at the wrong moment. A weak twig could collapse under pressure. People learned to test everything before relying on it. Tools were not disposable. They were treasures. Even simple digging required skill. Breaking frozen soil with stones, loosening packed earth with wooden levers, or scraping snow away with bone tools, each step had its rhythm. Using the right tool in the right way saved strength and energy. Both precious in winter, some tools were multi-purpose. A flat stone could be a scraper, a hammer, or even a cooking surface. A branch could become a digging stick, a walking aid, or a support beam. This versatility meant fewer mistakes and more survival chances. The creation of tools was often a communal activity. Children watched and helped, learning the methods of shaping and using each item. Elders supervised, passing down techniques refined over generations. Each generation added subtle improvements. A better shape, a sharper edge, a stronger binding. Even humor existed in the process. Sometimes a tool broke unexpectedly, or someone misjudged a branch's strength. Laughter followed quickly, not to mock, but to release tension. Winter was serious, but people needed moments like this to keep spirits alive. By using what nature provided, people became skilled in observation, patience, and creativity. Stones, bones, wood, and fibers were no longer simple objects, they became lifelines. With these tools, humans could dig into frozen earth, build underground shelters, store food safely, and withstand the harshest days of winter. Every tool was proof of knowledge passed down quietly through generations. It showed that survival was not just about muscle or luck. It was about understanding, respecting, and working with the land. Nature gave the materials, people gave them purpose. And in winter, that combination made the difference between surviving and struggling. The ground was hard, colder than anything people had ever felt. Winter had frozen it solid, and yet survival demanded they dig into it. Every inch mattered. Every strike of a tool had to count. Digging into the frozen earth was not just work, it was an art shaped by patience, strength, and observation. People used stones, bones, and wooden tools to break the ice, cold soil. Each tool had a purpose. A sharp stone chipped at frozen clumps. A sturdy branch worked like a lever to pry loose the heavy earth. Bones scraped and shaped edges for storage pits or small shelters. The process was slow. One could not rush frozen earth, it would fight back. Teamwork was essential. Families worked together, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in groups. One person pried, another removed loosened soil, another carried supplies or supported the walls of the pit. Digging was tiring, and winter made muscles stiff, but working together made it possible. Even children helped, passing small stones or brushing away loose soil. Every pair of hands counted. The deeper they dug, the more the earth itself seemed to protect them. Beneath the frozen surface, the temperature became steady. The wind above could howl and snow could pile high, but inside the ground it was calm. This calm made the effort worthwhile. It was a quiet reward for patience and careful work. Planning was as important as strength. The depth and shape of a pit had to be considered. Too shallow, and it offered little protection. Too deep, and it risked collapsing. The shape had to be wide enough for people to move, yet compact enough to hold warmth and resources. Every decision mattered. Digging also required observation. How did the soil respond to pressure? Did water seep through? Would the walls hold? People learned to read the ground like a living thing. Every crack, every frozen layer, every soft patch told a story. Listening to the earth's feedback was crucial for survival. Mistakes were lessons, not failures. A small collapse, a tool breaking, or digging in the wrong spot taught patience and strategy. Elders reminded the young that winter was unforgiving. Rushing the earth was like rushing survival. It never ended well. Even in hard work, humor appeared. Someone slipping on ice, a tool bouncing unpredictably, or snow falling in the wrong place could bring a quiet laugh. It reminded everyone that life continued. Even in the hardest season, laughter was small warmth against the cold. Digging into the frozen earth was also spiritual. The ground was not just soil, it was protection, a shelter, and a connection to ancestors. People felt grounded, literally and metaphorically. Every pit or underground space was a step closer to safety and a way to honor the land that supported them. After hours of careful work, the result became clear. Deep pits for storage, shallow shelters for protection, spaces to survive long winter nights. The frozen earth had been transformed into a refuge. Every strike of the tool, every scoop of soil, every shared effort had built something that could withstand storms and freezing winds. Through digging, people learned respect for both the land and themselves. They understood patience, teamwork, observation, and adaptation. The frozen earth was harsh, but it also offered calm, stability, and survival. In the end, digging was more than physical labor. It was a lesson in life itself. The hands that dug were careful, skilled, and thoughtful. Every person contributed. Every action mattered. And beneath the frozen surface, People found what they needed most in winter: safety, warmth, and a quiet place to survive. The underground shelters were more than just holes in the ground. They were carefully designed homes, built to protect families from the harshest winters. Every part had a purpose. Every shape was thoughtful. Survival depended on the structure as much as it depended on fire, food, or tools. Most shelters were shaped in simple forms, often round or oval. Curved walls helped keep warmth inside and cold out. Sharp corners trapped air and allowed the wind to sneak in. So round shapes became common. The earth itself supported the walls, pressing gently to make them stable. Nature and design worked together. The floor was usually dug slightly below the surface. This lowered the living space, keeping it away from wind and snow. The depth also helped keep the temperature steady. The ground stayed warmer than the air above, and even during the coldest nights, the inside of the shelter remained tolerable. Walls were built with a combination of earth, wood, and sometimes stone. Wooden posts supported the structure, while packed soil created insulation. Some tribes added layers of grass, reeds, or moss to fill cracks and hold warmth. Every layer mattered, and every material had a purpose. The roof was another critical part. Wooden beams formed the frame, carefully placed to hold the weight of the soil and snow above. On top, a thick layer of soil and plant material acted as a natural blanket. It kept the cold out and warmth in, while still letting water drain away. Some roofs were slightly domed to prevent collapse, letting snow slide off rather than pile up dangerously. Entrances were small and carefully positioned. They often faced away from prevailing winds, using the land as natural protection. Sometimes the entrances had a slight downward slope, allowing cold air to stay near the bottom, while the warmer air stayed above. This simple trick made a huge difference in maintaining heat inside. Inside, space was limited but efficient. People slept close together for warmth, and storage was arranged to be easy to access without losing heat. Every object had its place, and nothing was wasted. Living underground required careful planning of space, movement, and fire placement. The central hearth was usually located in the middle. It provided warmth and a place to cook. Smoke had to escape, so small smoke holes were built in the roof, cleverly positioned to pull smoke up while minimizing heat loss. Even a tiny mistake could make the space smoky or let the cold sneak in. Some shelters had hidden storage pits inside or just outside. These kept food safe from animals and the cold, using the earth's natural insulation. Roots, dried meat, and other essentials were tucked away carefully, ready for use throughout the long winter. Construction was not fast. It took days, sometimes weeks. Every shelter required planning, cooperation, and patience. Children helped in small ways, elders guided, and everyone contributed. It was a communal effort, strengthening not only survival but social bonds. Over time, the designs became more refined. Each generation added small improvements, adjusting the shape, the roof, or the walls based on what worked in previous winters. Knowledge passed down through experience ensured that the next family could survive even harsher conditions. The roof was the most important part of any underground shelter. It was more than just a cover. It was the shield against the storm, snow, and biting wind. If the roof failed, everything inside could be lost. So people treated it with care, patience, and respect. Wood formed the base. Sturdy beams were chosen to support the weight above. Some beams came from strong trees, split and shaped carefully. Others from smaller branches tied together. The goal was simply make something strong enough to hold soil, snow, and rain without breaking. Every beam was tested in small ways before being placed in the roof. On top of the wooden frame, layers of natural materials were added. Grass, reeds, and moss acted as insulation, filling gaps between the beams. These layers trapped air, keeping warmth inside and the cold outside. They also absorbed moisture, preventing leaks from melting snow or rain. The combination of materials worked quietly but effectively. Soil covered the top, forming the final layer. Packed carefully, it added weight that pressed the layers beneath together, making the roof stable. It also acted as a natural blanket. The earth stayed calm beneath the frozen surface, holding warmth inside the shelter. Snow falling on top did not sink immediately, it rested, giving an extra layer of insulation without adding danger if the roof was built well. The shape of the roof mattered. Many were slightly domed, allowing snow and rain to slide off instead of piling up dangerously. Flat roofs were rare and only used when the ground above could handle the extra weight. A poorly shaped roof could collapse under winter's pressure, so form was as important as materials. Small openings were part of the design too. A central smoke hole allowed fire smoke to escape while minimizing heat loss. Its placement was deliberate, high enough to pull smoke up, but carefully insulated so cold air did not rush in. Even the smallest miscalculation could make the shelter smoky or drafty. Building a roof required teamwork. Adults lifted beams, tied joints, and layered materials. Children helped by carrying smaller branches or stuffing grass into cracks. Elders supervised, passing down knowledge learned from decades of winter experience. Every hand, every eye, every mind contributed. The process taught patience. One could not rush. Laying grass too loosely, packing soil too quickly, or placing a beam incorrectly could weaken the entire structure. Winter punished carelessness silently through cold drafts or collapsing weight. By the end, a well-built roof was more than protection. It was a quiet promise of safety. Beneath it, families could cook, sleep, and wait out storms. Fires burned steadily, warmth stayed, and the shelter held firm even during long, harsh nights. The combination of wood, grass, and soil was simple yet brilliant. Nature provided the materials, human skill shaped them, and generations of wisdom ensured the roof could survive winter's full force. This careful, layered construction was proof that survival was not just about strength. It was about intelligence, patience, and knowing how to work with the world rather than against it. Smoke was both a friend and a challenge. It gave warmth and cooked food, but if it could not escape, it became a threat. In underground shelters, controlling smoke was a skill learned over generations. carefully passed from elders to children. The simplest solution was a smoke hole. A small opening at the top of the roof allowed smoke from the fire to rise and leave the shelter. Its size and placement mattered. Too big, and cold air rushed in. Too small, and smoke filled the space, making breathing difficult. Every hole was measured carefully, guided by experience, not rulers. Positioning was crucial. Most smoke holes were slightly off-center, above the fire, allowing smoke to rise naturally while warm air circulated around the room. Sometimes small channels were dug above the fire, directing smoke toward the exit. The goal was always the same: keep the shelter warm and breathable without losing too much heat. Wind made smoke tricky. A gust could blow smoke back down the hole or into the shelter. To prevent this, people added simple protections: small overhangs, angled openings, or carefully placed sticks to block direct wind while still letting smoke escape. These subtle tricks made life inside much more comfortable. Even the material around the smoke hole mattered. Earth, moss, and grass were packed to prevent drafts, but carefully enough to not block the flow. Loose soil or poorly layered insulation could collapse or allow cold air in, turning the shelter into a trap of smoke and cold. Ventilation extended beyond the main smoke hole. Small cracks or hidden openings allowed air to circulate. Warm air could rise, and fresh air could replace it, preventing suffocation. These channels were simple but clever, often hidden in walls or the roof, so they did not weaken the structure or let in too much cold. Maintaining these openings was ongoing work. Snow or debris could block them. Moss could shift. Fire soot could accumulate. Every day, someone checked the smoke path, cleared it, and ensured it worked efficiently. Survival depended on it. Children learned early how smoke behaved. They watched elders adjust openings during storms, notice wind changes, and test small drafts. Over time, they learned that fire, smoke, and air were not just about warmth. They were part of the shelter itself. A well-managed smoke hole meant more than comfort. It meant safety. Fires could burn steadily without threatening the people inside. Warmth circulated, food cooked, and the air remained breathable. Families could survive long nights, knowing the shelter worked exactly as it should. Winter was relentless, and warmth was precious. There were no heaters, no blankets from factories, no hot water waiting at the end of the day. People had to rely on what nature provided, and on clever ways to stretch that warmth as far as possible. The fire was the center of life. A small flame could make a huge difference. But firewood was limited, and every stick had to count. Families learned to layer wood carefully, adding small pieces first to get a strong ember, then larger logs to keep the fire steady. Too much at once, and the fire smothered itself. Too little, and cold crept in. Balance was everything. People huddled close to the fire, but not too close. Heat needed space to spread evenly. Sitting together also shared body warmth. Children slept close to adults, and everyone adjusted their positions during the night to keep extremities from freezing. Warmth was as much about cooperation as it was about fire. Clothing made from animal hides and furs was essential. Layers trapped air, creating insulation. Some hides were soft and thick for sleeping, others rougher for outdoor work. People learned which pieces worked best together. Even small gaps could let cold slip through, so careful layering was a daily routine. The shelters themselves helped a lot. Lower floors kept people away from wind, and insulated walls slowed heat loss. The roof, packed with earth and plant material, held warmth inside. Smoke holes and hidden vents allowed fire to breathe without letting warmth escape too quickly. The shelter was a quiet partner in keeping people warm. Movement was another trick. People paced slowly indoors, worked steadily, and avoided sitting too long without stirring. Even small tasks, stirring the fire, fetching water, tending to storage pits, helped maintain circulation and body heat. Winter punished idleness. Hot stones sometimes helped, heated by the fire. Smooth rocks were placed near sleeping areas to radiate warmth. People could adjust them closer or farther depending on need. It was simple but effective, and required careful timing to avoid burns. Food also contributed to staying warm. Stews, roasted meat, and hot drinks gave energy, which the body converted into heat. Eating regularly and wisely was part of surviving the cold. Hunger made the chill much worse, so rationing was important but never extreme. Even small habits mattered. Sleeping in curled positions, wrapping tightly in furs, keeping extremities covered, and closing shelter entrances quickly during storms, all these small actions added up. Survival depended on the sum of careful choices. Warmth was not just physical. Fire shared space, and careful planning created a sense of security. People could rest without fear, knowing that their body, their shelter, and their community all worked together. Patience, observation, and cooperation were as important as any tool or fire. By combining natural materials, teamwork, and clever strategies, people survived winters that would have crushed anyone unprepared. Staying warm without modern heating required skill, attention, and respect for the land, but it was possible, and it worked year after year. Food was life in winter, and storing it properly could mean the difference between survival and struggle. Above ground, snow, ice, and freezing winds could ruin supplies. Animals could sniff out meat, seeds, and roots. But underground, food could last longer, stay protected, and remain usable during the harshest months. People dug special storage pits and small chambers beneath the earth. The depth helped maintain a steady temperature, keeping food from freezing solid or rotting. The soil acted like a natural refrigerator, calm and reliable while the world above froze. Even small variations in placement were tested carefully. Too shallow and frost could creep in. Too deep and moisture might seep through. Containers were simple but effective. Baskets woven from plant fibers held grains, nuts, and dried seeds. Hollowed logs or clay pots stored meat, dried fruits, and roots. The containers were placed in ways that allowed air to circulate, but kept the contents safe from animals and moisture. Every layer mattered. Preservation techniques were essential. Meat was dried, smoked, or salted before storage. Roots and tubers were kept in cool, dry soil. Berries were dried on racks or in small fires until all moisture was gone. These methods, combined with underground storage, extended the life of food dramatically. Organization mattered as much as placement. Food for immediate use was kept closer to the entrance or fire. Supplies meant for later months were buried deeper. Elders taught children which items could last longer, which needed care, and which to use first. Every decision could affect survival during the coldest weeks. Protection from pests was always a concern. Small animals, from rodents to birds, could cause havoc. Covering pits using tight lids and placing earth on top of containers prevented intruders. Even tiny mistakes could attract unwanted visitors, so vigilance was constant. Food storage was not static. Supplies were checked regularly. Snowstorms could bury entrances, fires could affect nearby areas, and the cold could shift soil. Families maintained their storage spaces, ensuring that nothing spoiled and that everything remained accessible without wasting energy or warmth. Community knowledge played a role. Techniques were passed down through generations. Elders taught not only how to store food, but how to rotate supplies, balance nutrition, and ration carefully. Mistakes from previous winters were remembered, and improvements were incorporated each season. Even small touches made a difference. Layering dried moss or leaves around containers added insulation. Placing heavier items on the bottom prevented crushing delicate foods. Natural scents or plant materials sometimes kept pests away. Every detail was purposeful. Underground storage created security. Families could survive longer, endure storms without risking hunger, and maintain strength through weeks of cold. The combination of careful planning, natural materials, and observation of the land allowed people to turn the earth itself into a reliable pantry. By storing food underground, Native Americans made winter predictable instead of terrifying. Each pit, pot, and basket was a small victory, a quiet testament to patience, intelligence, and respect for the world around them. Winter nights were long, silent, and heavy. Darkness came early and stayed late, stretching hours into what felt like endless black. Outside, the wind howled over snow-covered land, and temperatures dropped sharply. Inside the underground shelters, life moved slowly, carefully, and quietly. Every action mattered, every sound was measured. Families huddled together near the fire. The warmth of bodies, combined with carefully layered furs, kept the cold at bay. Children slept close to adults, learning from touch and observation how to stay safe. Elders watched over them, quietly adjusting furs, moving embers, and checking that smoke escaped properly. Even small movements had a purpose. Clumsy actions could waste heat or disturb the fire. Stories were told softly. Not dramatic tales meant to entertain, but quiet lessons woven into simple narratives. Elders spoke of winters long past, of storms that buried entire camps, and of mistakes that taught survival. Children listened closely, absorbing wisdom without realizing they were learning. Laughter appeared in small doses, sometimes at a small mishap or the cleverness of a sibling. But it was always subdued, never loud. The shelter had to remain calm, Tasks were steady, repetitive, and essential. Someone tended the fire, adding small pieces of wood at the right time. Others checked stored food, rearranging it for easier access or inspecting for damage. Water was carefully melted from ice or snow when needed. Even cleaning and repairing tools became part of nightly routines. Every task preserved warmth and energy. Sleeping arrangements were strategic. People slept in curled positions, heads protected with furs, and extremities covered. Those nearest the fire or in warmer spots rotated through the night, sharing warmth. Heat circulation inside the shelter was a quiet, practiced science, learned over years and guided by observation. Communication was calm and deliberate. Voices were low, gestures minimal. The fire crackled, sometimes loudly, but conversation was careful. Every sound above a whisper carried farther than in summer, and people learned to measure tone and volume. Even moments of stillness had purpose. Sitting quietly near the fire allowed everyone to conserve energy, plan for the next day, or simply feel the warmth. Silence became a tool just as important as fire or furs. It helped focus attention on subtle cues. The shift of wind above, the settling of snow, the movement of stored food, or the faint sound of animals outside. Meals were slow and deliberate. Stews and roasted food were shared carefully, not rushed. Hot drinks warmed hands and stomachs. Eating was as much about sustaining energy as it was about maintaining morale. Hunger and fatigue could quickly become dangerous in such cold, long nights. Children observed every detail, learning through doing. They noticed how elders added small twigs to the fire, how food was layered underground, how bodies were positioned for warmth. These lessons were subtle, embedded in life itself. By the time they were adults, the knowledge would be second nature. Long winter nights were not just a test of endurance. They were a teacher. They taught patience, cooperation, careful planning, and respect for the land. Inside these underground shelters, families survived by working together, listening to nature, and using every advantage that fire, earth, and wisdom could provide. Through warmth, quiet routines, and careful attention, life continued. Even as storms raged above and darkness stretched endlessly, the people inside remained safe, fed, and prepared for whatever the winter would bring next. Winter was harsh enough, but danger didn't come only from the cold. Predators, wolves, bears, and other animals prowled the snow, hunting for food. And humans sometimes faced rivals from other tribes, searching for resources. Protecting the community became as important as staying warm or keeping food safe. The first line of defense was the shelter itself. Underground homes were hidden from sight, blending with snow and earth. Small entrances reduced exposure, while curved walls and snow-covered roofs made the shelters hard to spot. From above, a passing predator or rival could see nothing but white or brown, a frozen landscape without signs of life. Families remained vigilant. Even during long nights, one or two adults often kept watch. They listened carefully for unusual sounds, a crunch of snow, a low growl, or footsteps that didn't belong. Silence inside the shelter allowed them to hear more clearly. and the quiet routines taught everyone to react calmly but quickly if needed. Dogs and trained animals help. Some tribes kept small packs to alert families when predators approached. A bark, a movement, or even a change in behavior could signal danger, giving people time to secure entrances or ready weapons. Weapons were simple but effective. Spears, bows, and sharpened sticks were kept close. Even a sturdy branch could be a deterrent. Children learned early to respect these tools, not just for hunting but for protection. They practiced quietly under guidance, so they knew what to do without panicking. Fires played a dual role. While essential for warmth, smoke and light also signaled human presence. Predators, cautious of humans, often avoided areas with active shelters. Fires placed near entrances or smoke holes made the shelter safer without exposing those inside to unnecessary risk. Community coordination was key. Families often worked together, helping each other maintain traps, barriers, and hidden storage areas. Sharing knowledge of predator patterns and safe spots ensured that no single group was left vulnerable. Elders guided younger members on how to react, teaching both strategy and calm judgment. Even small design features of shelters helped. Angled entrances allowed people to see who or what approached without being seen themselves. Slightly lowered floors kept children safe during an encounter. Hidden storage of food prevented the smell from attracting animals or rivals. Every detail served protection. Nighttime routines were deliberate. People avoided leaving the shelter unnecessarily. Tasks that required going outside were planned around visibility, weather, and wind direction. Even simple missteps could expose them to danger. Winter amplified risk, and caution was constant. Respect for nature was part of survival. People understood that predators were not evil, they were simply looking for food. Avoidance, observation, and preparedness kept both humans and animals safe. Predators were deterred without unnecessary confrontation, through hidden shelters. Vigilant watch, carefully placed fire, and community effort, winter's dangers from both animals and rivals could be managed. Protection was not about confrontation alone. It was about intelligence, patience, and understanding the world outside. Families survived by being alert, strategic, and respectful of the land that could either harm or shelter them. Not all underground shelters looked the same. Different tribes lived in different regions, faced different challenges, and had access to different materials. Over generations, this led to a variety of designs, each adapted perfectly to its environment. In forested regions, tribes often used more wood. Beams, poles, and branches formed strong frames for roofs and walls. Grass, moss, and leaves filled gaps, and soil packed on top added insulation. These shelters were sturdy and could hold the weight of heavy snow, while still allowing smoke to escape efficiently. In open plains or rocky areas, people relied more on earth and stone. Walls were packed tightly with soil, sometimes reinforced with rocks. Roofs were domed and often covered with thick layers of grass or sod. The goal was the same: protect from cold, wind, and snow, but the materials and methods reflected what the land offered. Some tribes built shelters partially above ground, with deep storage pits connected inside. Others dug fully underground, creating small rooms that were almost entirely hidden. Each design had advantages. Fully underground shelters stayed warmer and offered better protection from wind, while semi-buried shelters were easier to build and allowed for easier ventilation. Entrances varied too. Some tribes used simple downward slopes to reduce drafts. Others built small vestibules or tunnels that trapped cold air before it entered the living space. These subtle differences reflected careful observation of wind patterns and snow behavior in each area. Roofs also showed creativity. In some regions, grasses were layered thickly, held down with light stones or wooden beams. In others, multiple layers of soil were used to create a natural dome that could bear heavy snow without collapsing. Each variation worked with the local environment to keep the shelter safe and warm. Even interior arrangements differed. In some tribes, central fire pits were surrounded by sleeping areas in a circle. In others, storage was kept on one side, with sleeping spaces clustered together to maximize shared warmth. Fire, food, and people were arranged in ways that made the most sense for each group's needs. Despite differences, one thing remained constant. All designs reflected respect for the land, careful observation, and generations of knowledge. They were practical, efficient, and made to endure long, harsh winters. Children learned from elders how their own tribe's shelter differed from others. They noticed small details, like the slope of an entrance, the thickness of walls, or the materials chosen for insulation. Over time, they understood that survival was not about copying others. It was about adapting to the world you lived in. In the end, the diversity of designs was proof that intelligence, patience, and respect for nature could produce multiple solutions to the same challenge. Each tribe's underground shelter was a quiet masterpiece, shaped by its land, its people, and the lessons of many winters. The earth was more than soil, rocks, and snow. For Native American tribes, it was alive in a quiet, patient way. It provided shelter, food, and safety, and in return, people treated it with respect. Living underground strengthened that connection, because the land was no longer just beneath their feet, it surrounded them. Being close to the earth brought a sense of calm. Beneath frozen winds and heavy snow, the soil held steady. It did not complain, it did not rush, and it did not demand anything beyond respect. People felt this steadiness, and it became part of how they lived. The earth was a teacher as much as a protector. Many rituals reflected this connection. Before digging a new shelter or storage pit, people offered thanks to the land. They acknowledged the soil, the rocks, and the plants, understanding that without careful attention, survival would be impossible. It was not superstition, it was awareness. Every action had consequences, and gratitude reinforced careful planning. Children learned early to treat the earth gently. They were taught to dig without wasting soil, to move rocks with care, and to repair any damage they caused. This fostered mindfulness, teaching them that every part of the land had value and purpose. Even mistakes became lessons about respect and balance. Stories and teachings often tied survival to the earth itself. Elders spoke of winters that tested everyone, reminding listeners that the land provided, but only if it was approached wisely. These narratives reinforced the idea that the earth was a living partner, not a passive stage. The underground shelters themselves reflected this spiritual connection. They were not imposed onto the land, but shaped with it. Walls followed natural contours, roofs pressed gently with soil, and smoke holes respected wind patterns. Every design choice acknowledged the strength and patience of the ground that held them. Fire, too, was part of this relationship. It gave warmth and cooked food, but smoke was guided carefully to rise through openings in the roof without disturbing the earth unnecessarily. People understood that even elements like fire and smoke were part of a larger balance with the land. Food storage, movement, and daily routines all reinforced awareness of the earth. Supplies were buried in ways that protected both food and soil. Paths were chosen to minimize damage. Tasks were done thoughtfully, always with a sense that the land was watching and responding. This connection created a sense of safety and belonging. Beneath storms and snow, people felt held by something steady and enduring. The earth was a quiet protector, and in return, respect, gratitude, and careful practice kept the bond alive. Survival, warmth, and life underground were not just physical, they were spiritual. Being close to the earth taught patience, humility, and mindfulness. It reminded everyone that humans were part of a larger system, one that could provide everything needed for life, as long as it was honored and understood. Over time, underground living began to fade. It was not sudden, and it was not because the people forgot how to survive winter. The reasons were many, and each one reflected changes in the world around them. New technologies slowly appeared: metal tools, firearms, and later trade goods made some tasks easier. Fire could be controlled more efficiently. Storage could be built above ground with sturdier materials, and clothing improved with traded fabrics. What once required careful planning and patient work could now be done faster or differently. Climate and migration also played a role. Some tribes moved to regions with milder winters or more abundant resources. If snow and ice were no longer as extreme, the need for fully underground shelters decreased. Above, ground homes became practical, easier to build, and more visible for community gatherings. Social and cultural changes mattered too. As tribes interacted more with neighboring groups, ideas and living styles merged. Some underground methods were kept, but others were adapted or replaced. The focus shifted from purely surviving winter to balancing survival with trade, travel, and interaction. Maintenance was another factor. Underground shelters required constant care. Walls had to be checked, roofs reinforced, smoke holes cleared, and storage inspected regularly. As new options appeared, fewer people were willing or able to maintain these structures year after year. Above-ground homes, while still requiring work, offered convenience and visibility. Even safety concerns contributed. Hidden entrances and low visibility were great against predators, but as human conflict and migration patterns changed, fully hidden homes sometimes felt isolating. People valued being able to see and communicate with neighbors more easily. Despite the decline, the lessons of underground living remained. Knowledge about insulation, storage, fire management, and respect for the land continued to influence above ground structures. Skills passed down over generations were not lost, they evolved. In the end, underground living became less common, not because it failed, but because circumstances changed. Nature's challenges were still respected, but humans found new ways to meet them. Shelters moved above ground, but the careful planning, observation, and wisdom learned underground stayed alive in every winter, tested decision. Though these homes slowly disappeared, the memory of survival beneath the earth remained, a quiet reminder of resilience, patience, and intelligence shaped by generations of harsh winters. Even today, long after underground living has mostly vanished, the lessons of those shelters remain powerful. Modern life may have heaters, insulated walls, and endless supplies at our fingertips, but the principles learned from centuries of surviving brutal winters still matter. Observation is one. The Native Americans watched the land, animals, and seasons carefully. They noticed patterns in wind, snow, and earth, and used that knowledge to make decisions that ensured survival. In today's world, observation can mean paying attention to our environment, noticing patterns in daily life, or understanding risks before acting. Patience was another lesson. Digging into frozen earth, building roofs layer by layer, and carefully storing food were not tasks to rush. Every step required care. Modern life moves fast, but the ability to slow down, plan, and execute carefully is still invaluable, whether in work, relationships, or learning. Resourcefulness mattered then and still matters now. People used what the land offered: wood, stone, bones, and plants. They made tools, built shelters, and stored food creatively. Today, resourcefulness might mean using what we have wisely, repurposing items, or finding clever solutions instead of relying on convenience alone. Community and cooperation were crucial. Families worked together to build shelters, manage fires, store food, and protect one another. Survival depended on teamwork. Modern society benefits from the same principle: collaboration, sharing knowledge, and helping each other create stronger systems makes challenges easier to face. Respect for nature was embedded in every choice. The land was treated as a partner, not an obstacle. Actions were guided by understanding, observation, and gratitude. Today, this principle reminds us to live sustainably, consider the environment, and recognize that our survival is deeply linked to the health of the world around us. Planning ahead was vital. Food was stored carefully, fires maintained methodically, and shelters reinforced before storms arrived. Modern life can learn from this by valuing preparation, foresight, and awareness that decisions today affect outcomes tomorrow. Finally, adaptability and learning from experience were key. Every winter brought new lessons. Mistakes were corrected, successes remembered, and knowledge passed to the next generation. Today, Staying flexible, learning from failures, and passing knowledge on are just as important in navigating challenges. The underground shelters may be gone, but the mindset they created, observation, patience, resourcefulness, cooperation, respect, planning, and adaptability remains timeless. These are tools not for survival in ice and snow, but for thriving in any world, harsh or kind. In the end, the past whispers a simple truth. We may no longer need to dig into the frozen earth, but the wisdom of those who did can guide us through life, one careful, thoughtful choice at a time.